Is Mahayana Buddhism a fake religion? According to the vast majority of Buddhists, the answer is no. However, as I've noticed in the comment sections on many of my videos, there is a very loud minority that claims Mahayana is fake, made up, or illegitimate, and that the one true teaching of the Buddha is the quote Pali Canon. Let's talk about it. First of all, what do all these terms mean? Modern Buddhism can be categorized into two groups: the Mahayana, or greater vehicle, who follow a set of discourses by the Buddha called the Agamas, as well as a collection of teachings we call the Mahayana Sutras. The other group is the Theravada, or Path of Elders. Theravada also follow the Agamas, which they call Nikayas in the Pali language, as well as a collection of monastic commentaries, both recorded in what we call the Pali Canon. The often repeated mantra of anti-Mahayana activists is that the Mahayana Sutras, including the Agamas recorded in Sanskrit, are falsified texts. They say Mahayana teachings come from regular men, not the Buddha, and therefore lack validity or truth. The Pali Canon, by contrast, in their view, is the closest to the Buddha's original teachings. In their view, it is the unadulterated, unchanged, and the most authentic version of what the Buddha taught. Let's call this argument, because of its familiarity with the sola scriptura debates in Christianity, the Protestant Buddhism argument. Protestant Buddhism, while it sounds very bold and confident, is wrong. Historians and archaeologists have already debunked the Protestant Buddhism view. Discoveries in the Gandhara region of Pakistan show texts like the Prajnaparamita Sutras, a Mahayana scripture that dates to the 1st century BCE and discusses Pure Land practice. Now wait, 1st century BCE, that sounds pretty late, right? The historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, passed on into ultimate nirvana around the 6th century BC. That's a full 500 years after his lifetime. Surely this means the Mahayana are 500 years older than the Pali Canon. Except, the Pali Canon was also written down around the 1st century BCE. Yeah, the Pali Canon, the most complete and oldest Buddhist canon we know of. And that is the important part. It is the oldest we know of. At the time of the Buddha, religious teachings were often recorded on impermanent formats, like palm leaves, or recited by word of mouth. Recitation and memorization preserved the Buddha's teachings from master to student for centuries, until they were finally written down by royal decrees from monarchs. There may be older manuscripts to be found. We know as much as the artifacts from around the 1st century BCE still speak of various early Buddhist schools, like the Dharmakaptaka, schools that once existed alongside Theravada and Mahayana until they were absorbed by them. Which goes to another important point. Protestant Buddhism relies on the claim that the Pali Canon was unchanged and is the original teaching of the Buddha. However, we've already shown that it is not the original teaching since it was written down about 500 years later. And also, the Pali Canon was influenced by other Buddhist schools and changed multiple times. In fact, its modern form is only about 200 years old, dating to reform movements in South Asia, under monarchs that tried to curry favor from European colonial scholars, seeking to find their own El Dorado, or fountain of youth, a missing link that proves Buddhism was a long-lost version of Christianity. Instead, they found Theravada, seeking legitimacy from Western powers, creating a mythology that Theravada is an ancient, untouched tradition that survives amidst a sea of heretical thought. This is something I can't fit into one video, but please look up the history of Theravada in Sri Lanka to find out that, in fact, Theravada coexisted alongside Mahayana until the Mahavihara Temple, a radical fundamentalist Theravada sect, curried royal favor with the Sri Lankan kings and purged Sri Lanka of Mahayana by extreme violence and persecution. Now, unlike Christianity, outside the Protestant Buddhism discourse, Mahayana Buddhists have no problem with Theravada Buddhists. They practice side by side all the time. Both Mahayana and Theravada can be considered schools, not competing sects or churches. This means one who follows Mahayana is like somebody who majors in math. One who follows Theravada is like someone who majors in geometry. A math major and geometry major both attend the same university, study the same materials, and both get a degree, so their education is equally valid as a result. Therefore, Buddhists do not really attempt to criticize or go after other schools outside the ones they're already following and practicing with. So this false debate about the Pali Canon being the oldest and more legitimate Buddhist set of scriptures is totally out of place in mainstream Buddhism. It is historically inaccurate. since the written Pali Canon came into being around the same time as Mahayana scriptures. The Buddhist teachings were originally recorded by word of mouth, by trust between student and master. And that same trust between student and master is what influences Buddhists today to choose the school of their choice to follow, whether it be Zen or Tibetan or Pure Land or Theravada. This is something the Buddha himself taught in Mahayana and Theravada texts. The ability to think critically and ascertain whether to rely on the words of the wise in seeking the path to awakening. I don't usually do these kind of intense debunking videos, but I've seen enough hatred against Mahayana Buddhists on my videos that I feel the need to call this out. Mahayana is just as legitimate as Theravada. Both teach practices that were provided by the historical Buddha, and both lead us out of the cycles of suffering and toward the liberation of nirvana. If you are concerned about their validity, try them out yourself and see where you go. If you like what you see, keep practicing. And I hope one day we can both attain the Bodhi mind. Thanks for listening, and Namo Buddhaya.